So welcome to the Node API team meeting for June 5th, 2024. Before we get started, does anybody have any news or things that they'd like to share? Okay, if not, we will go to the issues that were tagged for the agenda. And I'll start by, like we already talked about, if there's any announcements or anything, then we can basically say, like, is there anything on some of these issues about like Epic experimental, SQLite 3 performance, or testing that we should chat about? Okay, if not, we can take a look at scale issues. And I know, Kevin, that you tagged one.
Yes, I tagged one. It's not even an issue. It was a PR that was merged, and it was introduced as a minor release. And somebody commented a little over a week ago that introducing this change um, as a minor broke some builds, and it was adding this engine.
And yeah, I suppose it's an interesting comment in that we probably had that documented before, but it may not have actually been um, like enforced, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think that's because I think what we basically do is we support all supported node versions, and that was
Right,
documented but not strictly enforced, right?
right,
And then
yeah,
we decided to strictly enforce it because I guess because I think what happened was in the release notes for when we were updating our CIs to remove various node versions, we would say, like removing support for node 16. And then somebody commented saying, why was this a case? I would expect it to be strictly enforced within the package JSON. And
right,
that's why this PR became, because we're like, okay, well, since we've always documented it, we might as well put it strictly enforcing it.
right.
And since it became introduced as a minor version, it was released as 710.
Yep,
I guess, it introduced a breakage if people did an npm install. I thought it would only show a warning, but apparently, because if it's considered a breakage, I would guess that it makes an error, or maybe there's a way that you turn warnings into errors, but
yeah.
I didn't think it
NPM
would be a
engine
breaking change.
steel. I think there might be like a script.
Um, I sent the link in the chat. I believe unless there's a engine strict config with the user's npm-rc, then I believe this is just a warning.
Right. Yeah, and I think I found like that search, same thing. So yeah, so it is just a warning, but you can set it to be strict.
I see. So in cases where people have it set to be strict, then their builds are failing.
Right.
Um, so I'm not sure. Does that mean that we would have to release a new version of 7x that undoes this so people can then still have it? Or do we have to just tell people to Like that was just one idea that I had.
Yeah, no,
What else to do?
it's a good thing because like it technically wasn't supported. Therefore, like if you're using the newer version, if you're using the newer version with something which is less than 16, it it may not work. Now, I guess it did work. So like certainly having the warning come up seems like a really good thing, right? And then if you've actually set it to be strict, it seems like you really want to not be running with something that's not supported. So it almost seems like you've asked for the strictness and yeah, okay, you know, I don't know. Anybody have a strong feeling of
Mm, I just wonder why do we need to restrict this in the first place? Do we have real kind of need for that, or
it probably came from somebody like, you know, if you're not supporting those new versions, why don't you have an engine that actually says that?
but technically, I don't know.
Because we always match the fact that we support whatever node versions are currently supported. And we just always matched that. So I don't know.
Well, we need to specifically say which ones we support because otherwise we get into challenges where like, you know, there it has kept us from adding like say new features and stuff because the older versions of Node don't support that. So I definitely think we want to continue to say like this major stream only supports these versions of Node. And so that we maintain the flexibility to do that, we cut that off on the majors. The question
I
would
feel
be,
like,
so go ahead.
the whole point of ABI stable API, I would pretty much say like we support to be backward compatible to start with, and if something pops up, but technically we better depend on effectively Node API version in some sense, and also kind of with C++ Node API should be adaptable to version which plugin supposed to use like.
So I think you know, while we've tried to keep the breaking changes to a minimum in the C++ API, that one actually, we haven't promised ABI stability. The
Right.
ABI stability is only on the C interface. I mean, C++, I think we didn't choose C++ for the Node API because it's hard to maintain ABI stability for C++. So it's kind of been like, let's minimize it, but we haven't guaranteed ABI stability for the
No,
version.
I get it. Like it makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. We never said C++ is ABI stable. What I'm saying that dependency with C++ API. This is pretty much engines. We're talking about dependency, and I just know organizations actually. In our group, we had some situations just because of moving to a new version of Node.js. Sometimes takes a lot of effort for many reasons, right? Like
Right.
sometimes
Yeah.
we
No, that's always, yeah.
use the
Yeah.
version with like two versions behind. Then we do like another big jump, like, but then we kind of stay on this version. So some organizations just simply don't have resources to move quickly to new version of Node.js.
But then they can stick with an older version of the API of the C, you know, the wrapper, right?
Right.
Well, yeah, they could stick with an older version of the package, but what if there's like a new version of the package that has a new feature that still actually would work?
Well, my argument in that case is like, if you can't update to a new version of Node, but you want to get the new features, you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? Like either, and I know this is like, I've worked with customers. I've been on the other end where like, you know, we did a minor update of our Java version and it blew up our whole application in production and like everybody's staring at you. So, but like there's a balance between hey, I'd like to be able to use my version forever. And as a maintainer, what can we actually support?
Mhm.
And so, like, I kind of fall on the side of if you don't want to change anything, well, then don't change anything. So if you're like, hey, I want to get a new feature, then it's reasonable to say, well, you've got to get a new version of Node to get that new feature, right? Right. Like either don't
Yeah,
change
I
anything,
definitely,
or if you're
yeah.
willing to change something to use that new feature, then yeah, you got to move up, right? Like that seems
Mhm.
like a reasonable balance to me.
But
One
thing
thing
is, maybe
that Well, one thing that I would also point out is that if we do have um, a strict engine requirement here, I'm seeing that we have a lot of like version checks in our code going down to like an API version 4 for the addition of is date. And I'm seeing that an API 4 is introduced, like all versions of 12 and up have it, right? So if we're saying that we now support 16, basically every version from 16 up will have is date. So we don't necessarily have to have that if version check, macro check anymore, right? So we could
Yeah,
kind
that's
of
a good
like
point
start
too.
cleaning up some of the
Yeah,
code instead of just continuously just adding and adding and adding.
right.
Because now, like, I don't know if people I don't think this engines check is included in like Node 12, but like I don't know if anybody using Node 12 would even try using a newer version like this, right? So
Well,
I
on
think
that
if we're
part,
gonna start doing some strict stuff with versioning, maybe we can start actually removing deprecated things that
yeah,
can't even, or like start cleaning up some code paths that will always execute.
yeah, it's a good point that's so there's kind of like three different, at least two, maybe three different things that we should sort of discuss and agree on. Is like one, we have been like saying, here's our minimum version supported, and like, and is that still reasonable? Or sorry, do we want to continue with that? I think so. That's one thing. The second one is like, if we're doing that, which we've been doing, do we want to, does it make sense to put it in the engines field? Like, I'm sure this came because somebody said, well, I didn't know it was you only supported 16 because it was documented, but I got to go find that documentation, right? And so like, why wasn't there a warning when I ran with NPM and used a different version of Node, right? And so we said, oh, okay, let's do that. So it's that balance between like, do we impact people versus do we not help people find out that and do the right thing, right? And
Right.
then the last one would be, yeah, are based on what we're doing, is there any optimization that we could then do in the APIs, like in the implementation, to sort of make it simpler because we've chosen the versions that are supported.
Yeah. But then I guess kind of going back to the overall question here is like, what do we want to tell the person
Right.
who posted the question?
But I think we need the very first one. Like I would still argue we only want to support the Node LTS versions. Um, and if you want to use an older version, an older Node version, you can do that. You just have to use an older version of Node add-on API, and we've said that we'll make it a December major to drop support. So you can clearly say like, I'm willing to take up to this version. Yes, there's no updates, there's no support, but you're actually using a Node version which has no supports, no updates. So like, I think in my mind, that is, I'd
Mhm.
argue that, yeah, we still do that, right? I
Yeah,
don't know if anybody disagrees with that or,
I think that makes sense to me.
but
so we're, so go
this
ahead.
specific for this specific case, we do can we produce new version of 7.x which removes this restriction because effectively breaking people?
So then on to this one, right? Like we could, then I think the second point is like, okay, um, do we want to limit? Like, we don't need to hard limit it, right? Like, is that the right answer? Or do we want to just have it documented? And then if it works for them, that's okay. But like if they came to us and said it doesn't work, we would point them to the documentation. So like I think for the second part is like going forward, do we want to have it in the package JSON or not? Because if we said no, then we should just take it out and not put it back in. If we say yes, then we get to Vladimir's question of like, yeah, we probably should have done it in a major, so let's take it out for 7.1, right? Like, so
Right.
the next question is like, do we think the right answer is having that in the packages JSON going forward or not?
I'm actually in favor not having it, but mostly because what we claim that Node API does not really, it's kind of version independent, and this restriction for the Node version, it's rather artificial at this point. But again, it's just my opinion.
Okay. I was kind of thinking I like having it because it would provide opportunities to clean up a lot of our code paths that will always happen. Because that, for example, when I was looking at working with these finalizer stuff, there's a to-do in there that says, remove this attach data method once all supported engines have an API add finalizer or something like that, right? So we have some like dead code that is never gonna, that we can just clean up, that would make it, maybe a little bit more understandable, more readable if we can, have it a restriction.
I think
And, maybe we can still do that regardless and remove it from this engine's JSON and have it documented as well. Like maybe we can do a little bit of both, but I still think that we should have a general pathway of cleaning up those code paths.
in terms of the cleanup, I'd say like I don't think it being there or not should really affect that, because if we've
Okay.
documented a certain version. But what I will say is like if somebody has said I want to target Node API 4, they shouldn't be forced to change their code, right? Because we've kind of like this goes back a little bit to Vladimir, like we've said that
Okay.
like you can choose a Node API version, and so we don't necessarily want to force somebody to
I
change the code,
see.
right? Like even though all versions support 7, their code may have been written for 4, and when they move to a new LTS version of Node, that should just run, as opposed to having to say, well, no, now you have to go to 7 or something, right? So we might still
Yeah,
be able
that
to do
makes
some cleanup,
sense.
but we would have to be careful that we're not breaking that part of it, right?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense because like building on a Node 22 engine, you can target a different node. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Right. And so it shouldn't be that like, hey, you moved up to a new node version and yeah, you're broken. No, that should just run.
Right.
And if you targeted 4, that just continues to work, right? And
Okay. It makes sense then.
like I'm sort of like I'm on the edge, like on this one, it's like I could go either way, right? Like we don't want to break people. We don't want to like artificially limit the way people can use it. If they want to choose to use it, I might argue that like since it's a warning by default, that's actually maybe the right thing, is that like because it doesn't break you by default. It's only if you said I really want to strictly honor these things. My question would be, is it that they've set it to strict, or is it that some intermediate module set it to strict, in which case like the end user doesn't have a choice, right? Like that would be something that I could see being an issue.
I don't think some intermediate module can set that npm config for users, because this engine strict has to be set in npm RC, which will only
Okay.
present at a repository level or user level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe based on that, sorry, go ahead.
I will also point out that we have done also a major release of 8.0.0, which we have also included this engines. So now if we do remove it out, we're kind of, flopping back and forth a bit.
Yeah, we can only create a temporary branch for 7.1.1. So to create if we want to create that version, then we have to create a temporary branch for it.
So I would kind of lean on for 8 and above, we should leave it in. Like it seems like
I
it's a
agree.
warning. You've decided to turn it on to be strict, so it's probably good. But I would also agree that for like 7, it would probably be a good idea to just back it out. And if we can do a point release, then I'd be okay with that. I don't know what other people think.
Yeah, but like John said, like we need to create a temporary branch because if we have this new release system, we're
Right.
not able to release it from main anymore. Sounds like.
But I think even just because main is now on 8, like we're gonna have to create a branch from the tag. I'm pretty sure there'll be a tag that was generated, right? And so we'll need to
Yeah, there
create
was a
branch
tag.
from that tag.
And it's not about the release system, it's just about the commit history we have made after the last 7.1 release. So we cannot just land it on the main branch.
Yeah. Yeah, we basically need to create a branch off of 7.10. And then did it go in? Yeah, yeah. Create a branch off of 7.10, back out that change, and then do a publish. Does that sound like everybody agree that that's what we should do?
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
Okay.
Do
So I'm
you
gonna
think this release please process that we're working on would be able to do something like that, or is it a little too specific since it's with making a release from a previous tag?
I think it'd be easier just to do it manually. I don't know release please well enough, but like I think it it's got to be.
Yeah, I
I
would
guess
suggest
it's more
just
complicated. Go ahead.
yeah, I would just release it manually
Okay.
because well I have been altering release place config for a while, and I think there are some tricks in the release place for non-linear release history.
Okay.
Fine. Back to, I guess. Stale. Nope, I'm on the wrong one.
You miss. Okay.
Yeah. I'll get it eventually.
And in the future, if we want to change a supported set of supported engines, it should be just major release.
That's what we've done. Like we've
Yeah.
done a doc when we update the document, we made it a major,
Right.
and so yeah. Any volunteers to do the release?
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay. Many thanks. Okay, so back then, I think that's all for the stale issues. So then we can go into the issues in the repos, and This one. Anything to discuss on this one, or just this is just fixing up to get it working, right?
Yeah, I just found out there's a puzzle in the release place GitHub action that it will just ignore all the config files when there is a release type field in the GitHub action config YAML. So, which is,
Okay.
well, I mean, yeah, this is just a fix up of the release place so that we can make a release sooner. And I will release the 7.1 manually.
Okay. This one, so this is what it looks like for so you're still like working on that
Yeah,
today.
it didn't update the version number in the README file because it just ignored the config file.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. The Node GC one, anything to discuss on that one?
Yeah, I do have something that's, yeah, if we can click there and go basically near the bottom. Because I saw that Gabe and Michael, I saw that you commented on
Yep.
Gabe's message about having it be called a basic env.
Yep.
Um, and I guess if you can, I think it's his, yeah, if you go to his issue there, discussion naming of envs,
Sure.
where
Okay.
he mentioned it.
Nope. Sorry. Wrong one. There we go.
Yeah, and just in case anybody hasn't really seen it. If you want to go to his first message, the first post, basically, what he's saying is that we can have the node GC env that we've all been talking about be a basic env. And he has messages there like basic conveys that, you can do fewer things on it. And those fewer things mean that you cannot access, the JavaScript heap. You cannot manipulate call functions, things like that. Um, and I think that really does make sense to me. And he sort of gave some examples there. And then does anybody have any
Yeah, I
comments
kind
about?
of like I was like I hemmed and hawed a little bit, but in the end I'm like that may be as good as we can do, right? Like I do see the like if I see a basic env and I've got like just a nappy env, I'm like I can probably pass the nappy env for the basic env,
Hmm.
right? But not necessarily the other way around. So I'm like, okay, because I thought of like, well, what about like Node API restricted env, right? But then it's like, uh, can I pass a regular env into the
Right.
restricted env? Maybe not, right? So yeah, I think it seemed to intuitively, at least for me, follow like implement what we wanted.
Hmm. Right. And then going off where we would have the concept of a synchronous finalizer. And this is sort of copied from his snippet where it said sync finalizer, which has the basic end because it is synchronously running with the garbage collector. And he put my regular finalizer because it has, the regular end or whatever. Um, to me, I think it makes sense to have it be called a synchronous finalizer, which is this sort of new thing that we're adding, and then a asynchronous finalizer because it's running asynchronously in context of the garbage collector cycle. And with that sort of in mind, I had updated the documentation because last week we had discussed that it makes sense to have a general page for finalization. So if you go back to the PR and at the very last comment in the conversation.
Oh, sorry.
Mhm. I linked to the documentation that I've been working on. And it sort of, if you want to open that up, and it sort of brings together all of the things that we've been discussing, where we want to rename the node.js to basic env, have the concept of an asynchronous and a synchronous finalizer. So people can take a look at this, and if the documentation makes sense, then we can sort of feel good about, the naming conventions that we're using.
My first question would be, like, do we want to, like, the nice thing about the basic one is that it doesn't stray into like, well, why is it constrained, right? It's just, this is a more basic one. And the type system is going to constrain you to what you can and can't do, right? But we
Okay.
haven't we haven't said because you're running in a finalizer or not. It's just like you can only run a subset of the APIs in this basic. So I almost wondered if like my basic finalizer and my regular finalizer or something like that, or even just my basic finalizer and my finalizer. Right? Because then it ties to like, well, my basic finalizer basically can do less stuff.
Well, because when I'm writing this documentation for the changes now, and now, say for example, an external can take a finalizer, and this finalizer can be either a basic finalizer or a blank. And
Right.
that's and we're trying to figure, like, I would like to have some sort of separation where, if there's two types of finalizers, a basic one, if that's what we decide,
Yeah.
and something else,
Yeah,
you know.
that would be fine. Like, so like my basic finalizer and my regular finalizer, I'd be my main comment was like, do we want to actually bring the fact that it's the synchronous part in the GC or not that's limiting what you can do? Or do we want to make it more generic where it's like there may be that we've got finalizers that can only do a subset of things, and there's ones that can do anything. We might explain in the doc, like one of the reasons why it might be
Okay,
constrained is because it's running under the GC, but maybe in the future there's some other reason why we would constrain you.
that
And
makes
by
sense.
like not including it in the name, we haven't sort of tied it to that one case.
I
Yeah.
see.
One thing that comes up to my mind is that one example, a finalizer that is not restricted in Node is buffer finalizer, which is an implementation detail of Node, how Node implements the buffer, because it had, well, I mean, it's not implemented directly from the JavaScript engine.
Mhm.
And if one Node API implemented the buffer directly in the engine, which sounds quite reasonable because it quite similar to the tapped array, which is a subclass of tapped array. So in that case, that finalizer can just be a basic finalizer. So this is just, from what I can tell, just a implementation detail of Node.js.
That's
Okay.
actually maybe a problem though, then. I mean, we should possibly make it a basic env. Like if some engines would have to, or like I guess their implementation could hide that, could they? Like we don't want
Um,
something where when you write your code and then when you move to a different engine, you're gonna have to change your code.
you a finalizer implemented with basic env, and in this case can be called from the MPI env, while a finalizer implemented with MPI env cannot be migrated directly to Node basic env, right?
Right. And I think but I think you were saying like the buffer one, it uses the regular finalizer?
Well, I was advocating that market the buffer finalizers as basic
Oh,
basic
basic M.
finalizer
Yeah,
as
okay,
well.
no. So
Yeah,
yeah, that makes sense, right? Because then,
because yeah, I was saying that the reason that buffer finalizer is actually an actually give you a NPRM is that it is a implementation detail.
right, and that makes sense to me.
Mhm.
Now, that would be like in core, if we've already made it the general one, changing it would be a breaking change, right? But I guess maybe that's still experimental. We haven't promoted the no GCM stuff out of experimental, so maybe we can make that change.
Correct. Yeah. And I think Gabe had also mentioned we could also consider making a type alias if we do want to keep the old name to alias whatever the new name that we decide for the experimental stuff. Um, so then if
Please,
so,
I'm sorry,
go ahead.
please go ahead. Yeah,
Um,
I just found out that in core, the buffer analyzer is actually a Node.js
Okay, so
analyzer.
it is the right value.
Yeah, yeah, please go ahead. Sorry for interruption.
um, so is that what we want to call him? Is then like a finalizer can be either a basic finalizer or a regular finalizer? See, or can we just say like a finalizer could be basic?
Um,
Regular, yeah.
I think
Basic or synchronous?
yeah, do you have any cases where a finalizer must be not basic finalizer? Because I think it would be great to start with defining
Okay.
finalizer as basic finalizer one.
If you go to my documentation link that I provided, that I had down there,
Yeah,
wherever, um,
I'll have that. This one.
yes, at the very end, I made an example here where, if you scroll up a little bit, to the C++, yeah, to this code here. This is an example where perhaps you have some very large data that you want to wrap in an external object, right? And you want to free it during the garbage collection cycle, but you also want to call some JavaScript code to say some sort of logging message that this object has been freed. So that's what this example does here. There's a synchronous finalizer that takes the large data into a unique pointer so that it gets freed when it's out of scope. There's just this example for debugging stdc out here or whatever, but it adds this post finalizer passing the instance ID as a copy capture. Um, so that it could env. Okay, this needs, now that I'm looking here, that actually needs to be an env call to like run script. I've been going back and forth, but you can see where that asynchronous finalizer could be a run script call using the
Right.
env.
Yeah.
So that was the sort of example that I thought of.
I think it's a good example. I think I'm still wondering though, the GC, we're getting into GC implementation as to whether maybe there's some JavaScript engine that could in fact run JavaScript as during GC finalization, right? So, but like what we're really doing is we're giving more information. So like the basic, so like basic finalizer, we're saying there's some cases where if you don't do certain things, we're going to run more efficiently, right?
Right.
So it's and what that means, like in terms of finalization for the current implementation, is that like, yeah, if you're restricting yourself to these set of things, it can actually run synchronously in the GC, but some other implementation may not do that, or
Behave
it may always
differently.
do it, right? Like, but it's kind of like, so the basic part certainly is like, hey, we're going to use a subset of what's normally available. It lets us optimize in a particular way.
Right. Okay. That I completely agree with you, and that makes sense.
And then like
So,
these are still good examples, right? It would say, for example, the current implementation of V8, using a basic finalizer allows the GC to run synchronously and blah, 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 right? And so it's just be a way of like, in terms of the wording.
right, absolutely. So whatever we decide to sort of call it, so instead of a synchronous finalizer and asynchronous whatever, we'd be able to update the examples and everything. That makes sense. I do like the name of basic finalizer if we're going with, a basic env and a basic finalizer. And then maybe we should just say a finalizer can be basic if it implements this structure or this prototype.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
Like,
because then we don't have to actually, have a new word or a new concept for the existing NAPI finalize structure. Okay, I like that. Okay, so I'll go ahead and update this and keep you all posted.
sounds
There's a
good.
chat message. Um,
Is it just kind of, sorry,
Go ahead.
like food for thought, like should we kind of, instead of calling it like basic finalizer, can we call like fast finalizer? I was thinking like, remember I was discussing to add support for fast API, like V8 has fast API. And one of the requirements with fast API is they should not touch JavaScript or GC. And V8 calls these functions as a fast API.
I think
Yeah,
that sort of would go against what Michael was saying and sort of how like basic just means you have a limited set of what you can do. It does not necessarily even mean that it will run faster. So naming it something that's fast may be a little misleading in
we
my
could
mind.
say
It will be
optimized,
faster.
like optimized finalizer. That doesn't say what is optimized, right? Like,
Yeah.
fast again, it indicates, well, you'll be faster if you do this, but like optimize is like, it's really possibly optimized, but like it'd be fine with optimized because you don't know what's going to be optimized. And
Well, yeah, I would find that fast would be misleading because there is no really difference when the finalizer is running. It's just that the finalizer is scheduled earlier. In V8, this kind of finalizer is called like first round finalizer, and what we used to have the finalizer was called the second round. So that might be some option we have.
but again, that's starting to get very tied to the implementation, right? Like I
Yeah.
prefer something where everything changes. Optimize still makes sense, and we could still say that, like, yeah. Now it may not, unfortunately, like it might be that like to optimize the subset we have doesn't let us do that anymore, but there's at least some possibility, right?
Yeah, optimize is
I
a bit vague, right? Yeah.
I'm leaning
Yeah.
heavily towards a basic finalizer
It's a,
because then you could say a basic finalizer takes as its first parameter a basic env.
yeah.
And I think it just works well,
Yeah,
to
if
be
you
honest.
if you explain it someone in a conference, make it, like you're making presentations, much easier to pronounce and to say, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
But technically, this finalizer, just to be kind of be on the same page, these finalizers will be faster than asynchronous finalizers.
That is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just want to make sure that we're not saying it's the same speed. It's faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is faster.
Yeah, and in the wording, I think we can clearly go and say like, this allows us to do optimizations that may let it run faster, it may let it run
Mhm.
sooner. You know, there's no
Right.
guarantee, but based, you know, it may be different across the engines, but because you're using the basic finalizer, the engine has more opportunities to run faster, run it sooner, whatever, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And effectively, V8 documentation says like we should not even rely on GC actually calling this stuff to start with. So technically, we should not have any kind of we should not claim something. We did some magic stuff which works a bit better even than V8 garbage collector itself. Right?
Yeah. There is still no promise that a finalizer will be run at any particular time or
Right.
even at all, possibly, right? Like
In our case, we guaranteed to run like at least then we shut down Node.
on shutdown. Yeah. So we can say, maybe we could say that in the worst case, it will run on shutdown, but that's it.
Right. But we definitely. But what happened before the shutdown, we have no specific guarantee. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that pretty much solves what I was thinking. So I'll update the docs and go from there.
That's good.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks.
Oh, yes, I added that one
Yep.
recently.
Yep.
Just something that, going back on docs, something that I noticed is that there's some sort of inconsistency as to where sort of a function's description or its prototype are. Some are above, some are below, and it's basically 50-50. And I'm not really sure if we even have a standard or if we prefer one when making new documentation.
I kind of suggested we should just be consistent with the Node.js API docs.
That
So
makes sense.
I took a very quick look and I wasn't sure that I could categorize it into one of the two. But I think if you know, that would be my suggestion is like, I have no reason to choose one or the other, but like consistency with the Node docs is probably good. So let's just go that way. If
Yeah,
there's a
okay.
clear example, like it may be in the same mixture or something, but if there's a clear preference for one, let's do it that way.
Okay, yeah, I can take a quick look and then for the new documentation that I'm making, I'll put it in that format. And then put my findings in this issue and we can close it out then.
Yeah,
Close the issue.
yeah, it sounds good. And we might even open an issue that says like, hey, here's a good first issue kind of thing. You know, we decided that we should follow this, but we're in a mixture. Anybody who wants to help do incremental changes, here you go, right?
Perfect.
Talked about that. Any other one? I don't see any other sort of new ones. Any other ones we should chat about? Oops. If not, I'll flip over to Node. No issues. Issue. So Vladimir, anything you want to chat about on this one? Or?
Yeah, I think we'll sign off, but it was this week some issue was with CI. We couldn't run CI, but even now it was able to run it. I'm not able to see why it breaks. So like some other PRs also breaking CI. So I don't know. I think
Yeah,
it's ready to go. Just pretty much CI would actually.
Yeah, we're in a lockdown because of the security release, so that's why.
yeah,
But that should open up again next week.
yeah, I agree. I think this should be ready to go until we make this agree.
Okay, it's all just internal implementation.
Yeah, I hope that this change should not affect any external behavior. It's mostly kind of reducing size of classes we use.
Okay, so That's the key thing, because we have had lots of fun with finalizers for sure.
Yeah, I kind of appreciate all this work which was done before, and if actually it allowed to have this kind of refactoring to be relatively simple, because it's much cleaner right now. It was so much easier just to see what is there and why.
Any other ones then that we should chat about, or?
Nothing here.
Okay, well, if not, any other topics anybody has we should chat about before we close out?
Yeah, just a quick note before we close out that the release PR of 8.1.0 should be ready to be reviewed. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, so if I looked at that was in the node add-on API, right?
Yeah, not at all either. Correct.
And does it now include all of the like the changes that were made, even though we weren't following the like the conventional commits?
I will have a last check to make sure all the changelog are included. Yeah, but we are excluding all the dependable change because that would be quite verbosing.
Okay. Yeah, no, that seems reasonable. Would there be one that changes the supported version though? No, I guess it's 8. This is 8.1, right? Not 8, so never mind on
Yeah,
that.
we
Okay.
already did that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was my only question. Otherwise, if that makes sense. Since this is 8.1. Okay. So basically, we can test that out too, right? And it picked up, like, it's based on, because I think we were talking about whether it would pick up the version info based on like the labels that we had versus the conventional commit messages as well, right?
You can click on any of these PR links. You can
Right.
update the breaking change bit even after you landed the PR. So you can click any of them. Yeah, this one will be fine.
Okay, so we click that one, right?
Yeah, there's a begin commit override, so we can update the in the end of the opening description.
Right. I see. Okay,
Yeah,
right. So right.
yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
Got it. Okay, so we can easily, right. And from now on, if we documented that we should start using that?
This is documented in the release place, but I think we
Not this
might
piece,
need
but
to.
so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm just like in our contributor guide somewhere. Do we have contributing? Do we have?
yeah, we have contributing.
Right. So contributing, right? So like, I think this probably needs to say we use conventional blah, 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 right? And so 'cause we want people when they submit PRs, if at all possible, to include that like feat or in their commit comment, right?
Yeah, sounds good to me. Do you think this is a blocking PR for the release?
No,
A
I don't think,
blocking.
no. I'm just
Well,
thinking
then,
going forward, minimizing our work, so I wouldn't block it for sure.
yeah, sure. I'd be happy to add that document.
Yeah. No, that sounds good. Right. Okay, any other things that people want to bring up or discuss before we close out? Okay, if not, thanks for everybody's time, and we'll see
Okay.
everybody in GitHub next week.